Twice a day, my daughter texts to check on me. But that weekend, when she asked if I was alone, I lied and said yes. Thank God I did, because what I discovered in my own home that day would change everything forever. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, and I'm 73 years old. I live in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Harlem, where the subway rumbles beneath my feet like a heartbeat that never stops. Every morning, I wake to the sound of sirens and car horns, the smell of exhaust mixed with the coffee from the bodega downstairs. My joints ache as I shuffle to the kitchen, where that faded photograph of my daughter Sarah still clings to the refrigerator with a magnet from her college graduation 15 years ago. The routine never changes. 9 a.m. sharp, my phone buzzes. "Morning, Mom. You okay?" Sarah's text always reads the same. 5 p.m., another buzz. "Hope you had a good day? Love you." Those 12 words, twice a day, have become my lifeline to a daughter who lives just 20 minutes away in Manhattan, but might as well be on another planet. That particular Saturday morning in October, as the autumn light filtered through my thin curtains, I sat at my kitchen table staring at my phone. The text had come as always, but this time there was something different. "Mom, are you alone this weekend? Just checking." My fingers hesitated over the keyboard. The truth was, I wasn't alone. My son David had been staying with me for 3 weeks, sleeping on my couch, eating my food, using my computer at all hours. But something deep in my gut told me to lie. "Yes, honey. Just me and my crossword puzzles," I typed back. Within minutes, another message appeared. "Oh, good. David mentioned he might stop by. I'll tell him not to bother you." My blood ran cold. David was supposed to be at his job in Brooklyn. He told me he was working every weekend to save money for his own place. Yet here he was, supposedly planning to visit me, according to Sarah, while lying right there on my couch with his laptop open, typing furiously. I tiptoed to the living room and peered over his shoulder. What I saw made my knees buckle. Bank statements. My bank statements. Account numbers I recognized, balances I'd never seen before, and transactions I'd never authorized. David wasn't job hunting. He wasn't saving money. He was moving my money, large amounts, thousands of dollars flowing from accounts I didn't even know existed into accounts with his name on them. The room started spinning. I grabbed the doorframe to steady myself, watching my son manipulate my life savings like he was playing some video game. This was my boy, the child I'd rocked to sleep, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose college tuition I'd paid by working double shifts at 2 different hotels. I backed away quietly, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he'd hear it. In my bedroom, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my shaking hands. How long had this been going on? How much had they taken? And why had Sarah asked if I was alone? The pieces began falling into place like dominoes. All those times David had offered to help with my banking. Sarah's insistence that I give her power of attorney just in case. The new smartphones they'd bought me, the ones that seemed to know my passwords before I'd even shared them. The helpful visits that always seemed to involve them disappearing into my bedroom where I kept my important papers. I'd been so grateful for their attention, so hungry for their love, that I'd handed over the keys to my entire financial life without question. That night, after David left to meet friends, I called the customer service number on my bank statement. The automated system recognized my voice and began listing my accounts. 7 accounts. I thought I had 3. My savings account, which I believed held $43,000, actually held $8,000. My checking account was overdrawn. Accounts I'd never opened were hemorrhaging money to destinations I'd never authorized. I hung up and sat in the darkness of my living room, listening to the city that never sleeps. For the first time in my adult life, I felt completely, utterly alone. Not the comfortable solitude I'd grown used to, but the bone-deep loneliness of betrayal by the people you'd die for. Let me take you back to understand how I got here. How a woman who once managed a household budget through the Great Recession, who raised 2 children while working 3 jobs, who put herself through night school to become a certified accountant, could end up sitting in the dark, realizing she'd been financially gutted by her own children. It started 25 years ago, when my husband Frank lost his job at the Ford plant in Queens. The recession hit our family like a sledgehammer. Overnight, we went from middle-class comfort to counting every penny. I remember standing in the unemployment office with Frank, both of us too proud to admit we were scared. The line stretched around the block, filled with men and women who'd worked their whole lives and suddenly found themselves begging for help from a system that seemed designed to humiliate them. Frank couldn't handle it. The rejection letters, the closed doors, the constant no, followed by, "We'll call you." He started drinking. Not socially, not occasionally, but purposefully, methodically, like he was trying to erase each day before it could disappoint him. I'd come home from my shift at the hotel to find him passed out on the couch, empty bottles lined up on the coffee table like tombstones. So I became everything: the breadwinner, the disciplinarian, the cheerleader, the bill payer, the dream keeper. I worked the morning shift at the Marriott downtown, cleaning rooms from 6 to 2. Then I'd race across town to my evening job at a small accounting firm, filing papers and answering phones until 10 p.m. Weekends, I cleaned houses in the suburbs, taking the long train rides to neighborhoods where people paid me $20 to scrub their toilets and pretend I was invisible. Sarah was 16 then. David was 14. Old enough to understand why Mom was never home, old enough to help with dinner and homework, and keeping their father from completely falling apart. But instead of stepping up, they began to resent me. Sarah started staying out late, coming home with attitude and designer clothes I knew we couldn't afford. David withdrew, spending hours in his room playing video games, emerging only to complain that there was never any food in the house or that his friends all had things he couldn't have. "Why can't you just make Dad get a job?" Sarah screamed at me one night after I'd missed her school play because of a double shift. "Other moms don't have to work like slaves." The words cut deeper than she could know. I was working like a slave, but it was for them. Everything was for them. Every aching step, every humiliation from bosses half my age. Every night I fell asleep in my clothes because I was too exhausted to undress. I was doing it so they could keep their friends, stay in their school, pretend their world hadn't exploded. But teenagers don't see sacrifice. They see absence. They see a mother who's always tired, always stressed, always choosing work over them. They don't see the bills being paid, the lights staying on, the college funds I was desperately trying to protect. When Frank finally got back on his feet and found steady work again, I thought things would improve. I thought my children would understand what I'd done for them, appreciate the years I'd carried the family on my shoulders. Instead, they seemed to view my continued thriftiness as stinginess, my caution about money as selfishness. "Mom, you act like we're still poor," David would say when I refused to buy him the latest gaming console. "Dad's working now. Why are you so cheap?" Sarah was worse. She'd roll her eyes when I clipped coupons, make snide comments about my secondhand clothes, act embarrassed when her friends came over and saw our modest apartment. "God, Mom, would it kill you to buy some decent furniture?" What they didn't understand was that I'd learned something during those dark years. I'd learned that financial security was fragile, that it could disappear overnight, and that the only person you could truly count on to take care of you was yourself. So I kept saving, kept working extra hours, kept building a nest egg that would protect us if disaster struck again. I put both kids through college without them taking a single student loan. Sarah's degree from NYU cost me $60,000. David's from Syracuse was $55,000. I worked overtime for 6 years straight to pay those bills, my joints screaming every morning as I dragged myself out of bed to clean other people's messes so my children could have clean slates. Did they thank me? Did they graduate with gratitude for the sacrifice-free education they'd received? Sarah's graduation speech talked about overcoming obstacles and achieving dreams through personal determination. David's valedictorian address praised the power of individual ambition and self-reliance. Neither mentioned the woman who'd made their achievements possible. After college, they both found good jobs. Sarah in marketing at a Manhattan firm, David in computer programming. They moved out, got their own apartments, started their own lives, and slowly, gradually, Their phone calls became less frequent, their visits shorter, their interest in my life practically non-existent. But whenever they needed something, there I was. Sarah's security deposit when she wanted to upgrade to a better apartment. David's car payment when his transmission died. Sarah's credit card debt when she overextended herself on a European vacation. David's help with his student loan payments. Yes, it turned out he had taken loans, just not the ones I'd prevented. Each time, they'd come to me with stories of temporary setbacks, promises to pay me back, assurances that this would be the last time. Each time, I'd transfer the money from my carefully guarded savings, feeling grateful that my children still needed me, still called me, still included me in their lives even if it was only as a financial safety net. "You're such a lifesaver, Mom," Sarah would say, giving me a quick hug before rushing back to her important life. "I really appreciate this, Ma," David would mumble, avoiding eye contact as he pocketed the check. "I'll pay you back as soon as I get caught up." The paybacks never came. The temporary setbacks became permanent expectations. And gradually, my substantial nest egg began to shrink. But I told myself it was worth it. This was what mothers did, right? We gave everything for our children, and in return, we got the satisfaction of knowing we'd helped them build better lives than we'd had. Frank was no help. He'd recovered from his depression and unemployment, but he'd never recovered his role as a financial partner. He was content to let me handle all the money decisions, all the family obligations, all the emotional labor that kept our relationships functioning. When I'd express concern about how much we were giving the kids, he'd shrug and say, "They're good kids, Margaret. They'll figure it out." The first crack in my willful blindness came 3 years ago, on my 70th birthday. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks, dropping hints about a possible celebration, maybe a nice dinner together as a family. Sarah had promised to organize something special. David had assured me he'd cleared his whole weekend. My birthday fell on a Saturday. I cleaned the apartment, bought a cake from the bakery downstairs, put on my best dress. I waited. 9 a.m. became noon, became 3 p.m., became dinner time. My phone sat silent on the kitchen table like an accusation. No calls, no texts, no knocks on the door. At 8 p.m., Sarah finally texted, "OMG, Mom, I'm so sorry. I got called into an emergency meeting and totally lost track of time. Rain check on dinner? We'll make it up to you, promise." David's excuse came an hour later. "Sorry, Ma, food poisoning, can barely get out of bed. Happy birthday, though. Love you." I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by the birthday decorations I'd hung for no one, eating cake by myself while the city pulsed with life outside my window. 70 years old, and the two people who mattered most to me couldn't even remember my birthday until it was too late to fix their mistakes. But here's the thing that haunts me most about that night. 2 days later, I saw Sarah's Instagram posts from that weekend. Photos of her at a wine tasting in the Hudson Valley with her friends. Photos time-stamped during the exact hours she was supposedly in her emergency work meeting. She looked radiant, laughing, carefree, enjoying what was clearly a planned weekend getaway. I stared at those photos for hours, zooming in on her smile, trying to understand how someone could lie so casually, so cruelly, to the same person who'd given her everything. Was this who my daughter really was? Or was this who I'd raised her to be by always making excuses for her thoughtlessness? And David's food poisoning. A week later, he posted pictures from that same weekend at a comic book convention in Philadelphia. Dozens of photos of him looking perfectly healthy, meeting his heroes, enjoying an expensive weekend that I'd probably helped finance through one of his frequent emergency loans. That was when the doubts started. When the little voice in my head began asking the questions I'd been afraid to face. If they could lie so easily about something as simple as birthday plans, what else were they lying about? If they could look me in the eye and make up elaborate excuses to avoid spending a few hours with me on my birthday, what did that say about how they really felt about me? But I pushed those doubts down. I made excuses for them just like I always had. They're busy. They're young. They have lives to live. They love me in their own way. They show it differently than I expect, but it's still love, right? The pattern continued. More forgotten occasions, more broken promises, more elaborate excuses, but also more frequent requests for money. Sarah's rent kept going up. David's car kept breaking down. There were medical bills, and travel expenses, and networking events, and professional development courses. Always something urgent, always something that couldn't wait, always something that required immediate transfer of funds from my shrinking accounts. I enabled it all. Every time my phone rang with a crisis, I opened my banking app. Every time one of them showed up at my door with sad eyes and a sob story, I reached for my checkbook. Because as long as they needed my money, they needed me. As long as I could solve their problems, I still mattered in their lives. Meanwhile, my own life was shrinking. I'd stopped going out with friends because I couldn't afford restaurants anymore. I'd canceled my gym membership, my magazine subscriptions, my small luxuries. I shopped exclusively at discount stores, chose generic brands, turned my heat down in winter to save money. Not because I had to, but because every dollar I didn't spend on myself was a dollar I could spend on them. Frank noticed the changes, but never questioned them. He was happy to benefit from my financial sacrifices without examining why they were necessary. Free meals, paid utilities, subsidized lifestyle. Why ask uncomfortable questions when the answers might require him to step up? The warning signs were everywhere, but I was too invested in my role as the giving mother to see them clearly. Like the time I found Sarah going through my bedroom dresser, claiming she was looking for a phone charger. Or when David offered to help me set up online banking, insisting I needed automatic bill pay for my convenience. Or the way they'd both become so interested in my financial planning, encouraging me to simplify my accounts, consolidate my assets, make everything easier to manage. I thought they were being thoughtful. I thought they were caring about my future, want to make sure I'd be taken care of as I aged. It never occurred to me that they were positioning themselves to take care of my money long before they took care of me. The revelation came that Saturday morning when I caught David red-handed with my bank statements. But it wasn't really a revelation, was it? It was a confirmation of what I'd been refusing to see for years. My children didn't love me. They loved what I could do for them. They loved my bank account, my willingness to sacrifice, my inability to say no. They loved having a mother who would enable their lifestyle without questioning their choices or expecting anything in return, except the privilege of continuing to give. After David left that night, I spent hours on the phone with my bank's fraud department. What I learned made me physically sick. Over the past 5 years, nearly $200,000 had been transferred out of my accounts. Some transfers were large and obvious, the ones I'd authorized for their various emergencies. But many were small and frequent, amounts I never would have noticed unless I was looking for them specifically. $20 here, $50 there, sometimes just $5 or $10. Death by 1,000 cuts, stealing my financial security bit by bit in amounts so small they seemed meaningless individually, but devastating collectively. They'd been skimming my accounts like criminals, except criminals don't usually have Christmas dinner with their victims afterward. The customer service representative, a kind woman named Patricia, guided me through the process of securing my accounts. "Mrs. Johnson," she said gently, "I see this more often than you might think. Family members taking advantage of trust, especially with older account holders. You're not the first person to call us with this situation." Somehow, that made it worse. Knowing that my betrayal was so common, it had become routine for bank employees. How many other mothers were sitting in dark apartments, discovering that their children saw them as nothing more than accessible ATM machines? I started making lists that night. Every time I'd given them money, every excuse they'd used, every promise to pay me back that had evaporated like morning mist. The total was staggering, but the pattern was even more devastating. Every interaction we'd had in recent years had been transactional. They called when they needed something. They visited when they wanted something. They remembered my existence when their bank balances ran low. When was the last time Sarah had called just to talk? When was the last time David had stopped by without asking for a favor? When was the last time either of them had shown interest in my life, my health, my feelings, my thoughts about anything other than how much I was willing to give them? I couldn't remember. Somewhere along the way, I'd trained them to see me as a resource instead of a person. I'd been so desperate to maintain a relationship with them that I'd reduced myself to nothing more than my utility in their lives. The next morning, I called Sarah. My hands were shaking as I dialed her number. my heart racing like I was about to confess a crime instead of confront one. "Hey, Mom," she answered on the fourth ring, her voice already impatient. "What's up? I'm kind of in the middle of something. I need to talk to you about my bank accounts," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. There was a pause. Then, "What about them?" "I know about the transfers, Sarah. I know about the accounts I never opened. I know you and David have been taking money without asking." Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted from impatience to defensiveness. "Mom, I don't know what you're talking about. If there's something wrong with your accounts, maybe you should call the bank." I did call the bank. That's how I found out about this. "Found out about what?" "Mom, you're not making sense. Are you feeling okay? Maybe I should come over." And there it was. The gaslighting. The attempt to make me question my own sanity rather than acknowledge her theft. The suggestion that my mental state, not her behavior, was the real problem. "I'm feeling fine, Sarah. What I'm not feeling is stupid. I have bank statements. I have transaction records. I have proof. Proof of what?" Her voice was rising now, taking on the sharp edge I remembered from her teenage years when she was caught in a lie. "Mom, you're really starting to worry me. This doesn't sound like you." "You're right. The old me would have pretended not to notice. The old me would have made excuses for you. The old me would have been too afraid of losing you to call you on your lies." "My lies? Mom, I think you need to see a doctor. This paranoia isn't normal." I hung up. For the first time in my adult life, I hung up on one of my children. The silence that followed felt both terrifying and liberating. Within an hour, my phone was ringing. David this time. "Ma, what's this crazy stuff Sarah's telling me? Something about accusing us of stealing? That's not like you." "It's exactly like me," I said. "It's like the me you forgot existed underneath all the money you've been taking." "Taking? Ma, you gave us that money. You offered to help. We never forced you to do anything." "You're right. You never forced me. You just lied to me, manipulated me, and stole from me. But you never used physical force." "Stole? Ma, that's a serious accusation. All that money, you gave it to us willingly. We're your kids. That's what parents do. They help their kids." "Help, yes. Enable theft, no. There's a difference between helping and being robbed, David. I'm just sorry it took me this long to figure out which one was happening here." He tried a different tactic. "Look, if money's tight, we can talk about it. Maybe we can work out some kind of payment plan." "Payment plan? You mean paying back the money you stole from me? How generous of you to offer to return what was mine in the first place." "It wasn't stealing, Ma. You're being dramatic. Families help each other. That's how it works." "No," I said, my voice getting stronger with each word. "Families respect each other. Families communicate honestly with each other. Families don't lie and steal and gaslight each other. What you've been doing isn't family assistance. It's financial abuse." He hung up on me then. The son I'd sacrificed everything to raise hung up on me rather than face the truth about what he'd become. That evening, Frank came home from his weekly poker game and found me sitting at the kitchen table with stacks of bank statements spread out in front of me. "What's all this?" he asked, barely glancing at the papers as he headed for the refrigerator. "This is the evidence that our children have been stealing from us for years," I said. He stopped, beer bottle halfway to his lips. "What are you talking about?" I explained it all. The unauthorized transfers, the secret accounts, the systematic draining of our savings. I showed him the statements, the transaction histories, the undeniable proof that we'd been living with thieves who happened to share our DNA. Frank listened in silence, his face growing paler with each revelation. When I finished, he set down his beer and rubbed his face with both hands. "Jesus, Margaret, how long has this been going on?" "Years. At least 5 years of the small stuff, probably longer for the big stuff. Why didn't you tell me?" That question hit like a slap. "Because you never wanted to know, Frank. Every time I expressed concern about how much we were giving them, you told me to stop worrying. Every time I questioned their stories, you told me I was being too suspicious. You were happy to let me handle all the financial decisions as long as everything seemed fine on the surface." He couldn't argue with that because it was true. Frank had checked out of our financial life years ago, content to let me manage everything while he pursued his hobbies and social life. He'd been willfully blind to our children's behavior because acknowledging it would have required him to step up and be an active partner in protecting our family's future. "So what do we do now?" he asked. "We secure our accounts. We cut off their access. We stop being their personal bank. Margaret, they're our kids." "No, Frank. They're adults who've been taking advantage of their parents. There's a difference." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Frank's troubled sleep next to me. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about my relationships, about my role in my children's lives, had been shattered in the space of a few hours. The people I'd devoted my life to serving had been serving themselves to my life savings. But underneath the betrayal and hurt, something else was growing, something I hadn't felt in years. Anger. Real, clean, justified anger. Not the bitter resentment I'd carried about their neglect, but pure fury at being used, lied to, and stolen from by people I'd trusted with everything. I was angry at them for their betrayal. I was angry at Frank for his willful blindness. But mostly, I was angry at myself for being so desperate for their love that I'd allowed myself to become their victim. The next morning, I called my bank and closed every account that had Sarah's or David's names on it. I opened new accounts at a different bank entirely, one they'd never heard of, one with no connection to our family history. I changed my passwords, my security questions, my automatic payments. I built a financial firewall between myself and the two people who'd been bleeding me dry. Then I called a lawyer, a real estate attorney named Mr. Y. Rodriguez, who specialized in elder law and family disputes. His office was in a modest building in the Bronx, far from the polished Manhattan firms my children probably expected me to use if I ever decided to fight back. "Mrs. Johnson," he said after I'd explained my situation, "what you're describing is unfortunately common. Adult children who view their parents' assets as their inheritance, but don't want to wait for the parents to die to access it. Is what they did legal?" I asked. "Some of it was, because you authorized those transfers, even if you were deceived about their purpose. But the unauthorized access to your accounts, the creation of accounts without your knowledge, the systematic skimming, those activities could constitute fraud, identity theft, and financial elder abuse. What are my options? You could file criminal charges, you could sue for civil damages, or you could simply protect your assets going forward and cut them off financially. What outcome are you hoping for?" I considered that question for a long time. Did I want to send my children to jail? Did I want to drag our family through court proceedings that would become public record? Did I want revenge? Or did I just want protection? "I want them to understand that what they did was wrong," I said finally. "I want them to face consequences for their actions. But mostly, I want to make sure they can never do this to me again." Mr. Rodriguez nodded. "We can accomplish all of those things without necessarily involving criminal prosecution, if that's your preference. But I want you to understand something, Mrs. Johnson. People who are willing to steal from their own parents, people who are willing to lie and manipulate and gaslight their own mother, those people don't usually respond to gentle corrections. They respond to consequences." Over the next few weeks, I fortified my financial life like I was preparing for siege. Every account secured, every password changed, every automatic payment rerouted. I installed new locks on my apartment, not because I thought they'd break in, but because I realized I'd never actually controlled access to my own home. They both had keys. Both felt entitled to come and go as they pleased. Both treated my space as their backup storage unit. The calls started almost immediately. Sarah first, her voice tight with controlled panic. "Mom, my car payment bounced. The automatic transfer didn't go through." "That's correct," I said calmly. "What do you mean that's correct? Can you fix it? I'm going to get hit with late fees." "The transfer didn't go through because I canceled it. You'll need to make your own car payment from now on." "Canceled it? Why?" "Mom, I need that money. I budgeted for that help." "You budgeted for stolen money, Sarah. I don't fund thieves anymore." "Stolen money?" "Mom, we've talked about this. You're really scaring me with this paranoid behavior. The only thing that should scare you is the consequences of your actions finally catching up with you." She hung up on me. Within an hour, David called. "Ma, what's going on with the bank accounts? My rent check bounced." Your rent check bounced because I'm no longer subsidizing your living expenses. Subsidizing? Ma, that's not fair. You offered to help with rent until I got back on my feet. That was 3 years ago, David. How much longer do your feet need to get back on solid ground? I'm doing my best, Ma. The economy's tough. Good jobs are hard to find. Good jobs are hard to find, but stealing from your mother is apparently easy. I never stole anything from you. Then explain the unauthorized withdrawals from my savings account. Explain the credit card charges I never approved. Explain the investment account I never opened that you somehow had access to. Silence. David? Explain those things to me. I was planning to pay it all back. Planning to pay it back after you'd stolen it. That's still stealing, son. Don't call me son when you're attacking me like this. I'm not attacking you. I'm holding you accountable. There's a difference even if you've never experienced it before. That night, Frank tried to broker peace. Margaret, maybe we should sit down with both of them and try to work this out as a family. Frank, there's nothing to work out. They stole from us. I stopped them from stealing more. End of story. But they're our children. They're adults who happen to share our DNA. That doesn't give them lifetime access to our bank account. You're being awfully harsh. I'm being appropriate. For the first time in years, I'm responding proportionally to their behavior instead of making excuses for it. Frank retreated to his television and his beer, unwilling to engage with the reality of what our family had become. I realized then that I was truly alone in this fight. My husband was too conflict-averse to support me, and my children were too entitled to respect me. I was fighting for my dignity and my financial survival with no allies except my own newfound backbone. The harassment escalated. Phone calls at all hours, angry voicemails, texts that alternated between manipulation and threats. Sarah showed up at my door one evening, tears streaming down her face, begging me to stop this madness and be the loving mother I used to be. I am being loving, I told her through the chain lock I'd installed. I'm loving myself enough to stop letting you abuse me. Abuse you? Mom, I've never laid a hand on you. Financial abuse is still abuse, Sarah. Emotional manipulation is still abuse. Lying and stealing and gaslighting are all forms of abuse, even when they're done by your children. I can't believe you're talking to me like this. This isn't the mother who raised me. You're right. The mother who raised you was a doormat who taught you that you could take whatever you wanted from people who loved you. I'm not that woman anymore. But even as I stood my ground, the isolation was crushing. My phone, which used to ring constantly with their demands and dramas, now sat silent for days at a time. The apartment felt bigger and lonelier without their chaos filling it. I found myself questioning my decision, wondering if being used was better than being alone. That's when Mrs. Ramirez from upstairs became my lifeline. Carmen Ramirez was a 70-year-old Puerto Rican woman who'd lived in the building for 30 years. We'd exchanged pleasantries in the hallway for decades, but we'd never really talked until she knocked on my door one evening with a plate of homemade pastels. "I hear arguing upstairs," she said simply. "I think maybe you need friend." We sat in my kitchen talking until midnight that first night. Carmen had her own stories of ungrateful children, of financial struggles, of feeling invisible in a world that worshipped youth, but she also had something I'd lost: boundaries, self-respect, the ability to say no without apologizing for it. "My daughter, she live in California," Carmen told me. "She call once a month, maybe twice. Used to make me sad, you know. But then I realize she call because she want to, not because she needs something. That worth more than 100 calls asking for money." Carmen became my teacher in the art of living for myself instead of through other people. She showed me small pleasures I'd forgotten. Afternoon walks in the park, crossword puzzles solved at my own pace, meals cooked for one person and eaten without guilt. She helped me remember who I'd been before I became the giving tree, always depleted, never replenished. 3 months after I'd cut off their financial access, both Sarah and David showed up at my apartment together. I hadn't seen them in the same room since Christmas 2 years earlier, and even then they'd barely spoken to each other. Now they presented a united front, my little thieves joining forces to manipulate their way back into my wallet. "Mom, this has gone far enough," Sarah announced as soon as I opened the door. "We need to talk." "We're talking," I said. not inviting them in. Can we come inside? This is embarrassing for the neighbors. I stepped aside reluctantly, and they settled into my living room like they owned it, which I suppose they thought they did. Mom, David started, his voice unnaturally gentle. We know you're upset about the money thing, but you're blowing it out of proportion. We're family. Families help each other. Families respect each other, I replied. They don't steal from each other. We didn't steal, Sarah snapped, her fake sweetness already cracking. You gave us that money willingly. I gave you some money willingly. The rest you took without asking. That's called theft. Mom, you're being ridiculous, David said. Every transaction can be traced back to something you authorized. You might not remember all of them, but are you suggesting I have dementia, David? He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying that sometimes people forget. I haven't forgotten anything. I remember every lie you told me. I remember every manipulation you used. I remember every time you made me feel guilty for questioning what you were doing with my money. Sarah stood up, her face flushed with anger. You know what, Mom? You're being selfish. All our lives, you taught us that family comes first, that we should help each other, that we stick together no matter what. Now suddenly you're acting like some bitter old woman who counts every penny. I am counting every penny, Sarah, because those pennies represent the difference between me living independently and me ending up in some state-run nursing home because my own children stole my security. We didn't steal your security. We borrowed against your assets. Without asking, without my knowledge, without my permission. That's stealing, regardless of how you want to dress it up. David tried a different approach. Look, Ma, if it's really that big a deal, we can pay some of it back. Set up a payment plan or whatever. But cutting us off completely, that's not fair. You're punishing us for asking for help. I'm not punishing you for asking for help. I'm protecting myself from people who've proven they can't be trusted with access to my finances. Can't be trusted? Sarah's voice rose to a near shriek. We're your children. Exactly. You're my children, and you stole from me. If I can't trust my own children, who can I trust? They spent another hour trying every manipulation tactic in their playbook. They accused me of being paranoid, selfish, cruel, unloving. They threatened to cut off contact entirely. They promised to change, to be better, to respect my boundaries if I'd just give them one more chance. I listened to it all with a calmness that surprised even me. Their words, which once would have sent me into spirals of self-doubt and guilt, now sounded like exactly what they were. The desperate manipulation of people who'd lost access to their victim. I think you should leave now, I said when they finally ran out of arguments. Mom, please. David tried one last time. We love you. We don't want to lose you. You don't love me, David. You love what I can do for you. There's a difference. And I'm finally old enough to see it clearly. They left in a storm of slammed doors and muttered threats. I stood at my window watching them argue on the sidewalk below, Sarah gesturing wildly while David checked his phone. Even in their defeat, they couldn't be bothered to actually talk to each other. They'd only united against me, not for each other. That night, I realized something profound had shifted inside me. For the first time in decades, I wasn't afraid of their anger. I wasn't scrambling to fix their problems or smooth over their hurt feelings. I wasn't taking responsibility for their emotions or their choices. I was simply existing as myself, not as their mother-shaped ATM machine. But the real test came 2 weeks later, when everything I thought I'd settled was thrown into chaos once again. I was enjoying a quiet Saturday morning, drinking coffee and doing the crossword puzzle Carmen had brought me, when my phone rang. Sarah's number appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering, but something made me pick up. Mom? Sarah's voice was small, shaky, completely different from the angry woman who'd stormed out of my apartment. What is it, Sarah? I'm in the hospital. My blood went cold. Despite everything they'd done to me, despite all the lies and manipulation and theft, they were still my children. The instinct to protect them, to fix their problems, to drop everything and run to their rescue. That instinct was still there, still powerful. What happened? Are you okay? I was in a car accident. Nothing too serious, but I'm going to need surgery on my leg. And Mom, I don't have insurance. I lost my job 3 weeks ago and my coverage got canceled. There it was. The hook. The crisis that would require immediate financial intervention. The emergency that would make me feel selfish and cruel for maintaining my boundaries. I'm sorry to hear about your accident, Sarah. I hope your recovery goes well. Mom, I need help. The hospital wants a deposit before they'll schedule the surgery. $25,000. Have you contacted Medicaid? Social services? There are programs for people without insurance. Those programs take weeks to process. I need the surgery now, and I need the money now. Mom, please. I'm your daughter. I need you. And there was the manipulation I'd been expecting. The appeal to our blood relationship. The suggestion that helping her was my obligation as her mother, regardless of how she'd treated me. Sarah, I'm sorry about your accident, but I'm not going to give you $25,000. Not give, loan. I'll pay it back as soon as I get back on my feet. Like you paid back all the other money you borrowed from me? Silence. Sarah, I hope your surgery goes well. I hope you recover quickly, but I'm not financing it. Mom, I could lose my leg if I don't get this surgery. Then you need to figure out how to get it without stealing from me. I'm not stealing. I'm asking for help. You're asking me to rescue you from the consequences of your choices. That's not help, Sarah. That's enabling. I hung up. My hands were shaking. My heart was racing. But I'd done it. I'd said no to my daughter's crisis, maintained my boundaries even when the stakes felt life and death. Within an hour, David called. Ma, Sarah told me about the accident. How can you be so cold? She's in the hospital. She's in the hospital because she had an accident. She's not getting my money because she's proven she can't be trusted with it. Ma, this is different. This is medical. This is life or death. This is manipulation, David. Just like every other crisis that's required my immediate financial intervention. You're going to let your own daughter lose her leg because you're mad about some money? I'm going to let my adult daughter handle her own medical crisis because that's what adults do. What adult? She doesn't have insurance. She doesn't have savings. She needs our help. She doesn't have insurance or savings because she spent years stealing money from me instead of taking care of her own responsibilities. That's not my problem to solve. The calls kept coming. Frank begging me to reconsider. Frank's sister, who somehow got involved, calling me heartless. Even Carmen, my newfound friend, gently suggesting that maybe this was different. Maybe medical emergencies were worth reconsidering my stance. Carmen, they've been lying to me for years. How do I know this isn't just another lie? You don't, she said simply. But what if it's true? What if she really need help this time? Then she'll find a way to get it without me. Carmen, if I give in now, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering which crises are real and which ones are manufactured to get my money. I won't live like that anymore. That evening, Frank found me in the kitchen, staring at my phone. Margaret, I called the hospital. Sarah really is there. She really does need surgery. I never doubted she was in the hospital, Frank. What I doubt is that I'm the only solution to her problem. But $25,000, that's nothing to us. We have the money. We have the money because I finally stopped giving it to them. We keep the money by continuing not to give it to them. She's our daughter. She's an adult who's been stealing from us. Being our daughter doesn't erase that. Margaret, I've never seen you like this. You're being so harsh. Frank, I've spent 30 years being too soft. This is what appropriate looks like. I'm sorry if it seems harsh compared to being a pushover. The next morning, I did something that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. I called the hospital and spoke to Sarah's social worker. I'm calling about my daughter, Sarah Johnson. She's a patient there, and I understand she needs surgery but doesn't have insurance. Yes, Mrs. Johnson. We're working with her to explore her options. There are several programs available for medical assistance. Good. I want to make sure she gets the care she needs, but I won't be paying for it personally. I want that clearly noted in her file. Of course, Mrs. Johnson, that's not uncommon. Many families aren't in a position to cover major medical expenses. I want to be very clear. I am financially capable of paying for her surgery, but I'm choosing not to. This isn't about money. This is about boundaries. There was a pause. Then, I understand, Mrs. Johnson. I'll make sure that's documented. That phone call was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but also one of the most liberating. I was taking control of the narrative. I was refusing to let anyone paint me as the heartless mother who abandoned her child in a medical crisis. I was the mother who finally stopped enabling her child's irresponsible choices. Sarah got her surgery. Medicaid covered most of it, and the hospital wrote off the rest. She recovered fully, with no permanent damage to her leg. The life-or-death crisis that required my immediate $25,000 intervention turned out to be manageable through normal channels after all. She never thanked me for refusing to enable her, but she also never called asking for money again. David, on the other hand, tried a different approach. He started showing up at my apartment unannounced, not asking for money, but just checking in on me, bringing coffee, offering to help with groceries, trying to rebuild our relationship through small kindnesses. At first, I was suspicious. This was so unlike him that I assumed it must be part of some longer-term manipulation strategy. But as weeks turned into months, I began to see signs that it might be genuine. He asked about my life, listened to my answers, showed interest in my thoughts and feelings rather than just my bank balance. "Ma, I know I messed up," he said one afternoon as we sat in my living room. "I know I took advantage of you, and I know I hurt you. I'm not asking for forgiveness yet, because I haven't earned it. But I want you to know I'm working on being different." "What does different look like, David?" "Different looks like getting a second job so I can pay my own rent. Different looks like seeing a therapist to figure out why I thought it was okay to steal from my own mother. Different looks like calling you because I want to talk to you, not because I need something from you. And what if I never trust you with money again? What if this relationship has to be completely separate from any financial assistance?" "Then that's what it is, Ma. You don't owe me money. You don't owe me anything. I owe you an apology and a completely different way of being your son." I wanted to believe him. Part of me desperately wanted to believe that at least one of my children was capable of growth, capable of seeing me as more than a source of funds. But I'd been fooled before, and the price of being wrong was too high. "David, I appreciate what you're saying, but I'm going to need to see sustained change over time before I risk trusting you again." "I understand, Ma. I'm not going anywhere. I'll keep showing up, and hopefully eventually you'll see that I mean it." And he did keep showing up. Not every day, not even every week, but consistently. He helped me set up a new computer when my old one died. He took me grocery shopping when my arthritis was flaring. He called Carmen when I had a bad fall in my bathroom and needed help getting to the doctor. Slowly, carefully, I began to let him back into my life, not as the son who'd stolen from me, but as the man who was trying to repair the damage he'd done. It wasn't the relationship we'd had before, but it might eventually be something better, something based on respect rather than exploitation. Sarah, meanwhile, disappeared from my life almost entirely. After her recovery, she stopped calling, stopped texting, stopped acknowledging my existence unless she had no other choice. At first, this felt like another loss, another failure, but gradually, I realized it was actually a gift. She'd removed herself from my life, eliminating the temptation to fall back into our old patterns of dysfunction. Sometimes I missed her. I missed the daughter I'd raised, the little girl who used to crawl into my lap for bedtime stories. But that little girl had grown into a woman who saw me as nothing more than a bank account with convenient emotional attachments. I couldn't miss what had never really existed. The final test of my new boundaries came almost a year after I'd first discovered their theft. Frank had a heart attack, mild but scary enough to require a hospital stay and some lifestyle changes. As I sat in the cardiac unit waiting room, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Mom, I heard about Dad. I'm coming to the hospital." She arrived within an hour, looking genuinely concerned and appropriately somber. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope that maybe this crisis would bring out the caring daughter I'd always believed existed underneath her selfishness. "How is he?" she asked, taking the seat next to me. "He's stable. The doctors say it was relatively minor, but he'll need to make some changes. Diet, exercise, stress management. Thank God. Mom, I know things have been difficult between us, but family is family. Whatever you need during this time, I'm here." I felt the familiar tug of hope, the desire to believe that this time would be different. But I also felt something new, wariness. A healthy skepticism about her motives that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. We sat together through the long afternoon, making awkward small talk about safe topics. She didn't mention money. She didn't ask for favors. She seemed genuinely focused on Frank's well-being and my emotional state. But as the day wore on, I began to notice small things. The way she kept checking her phone, the questions she asked about Frank's prognosis that seemed more focused on timeline than recovery, the casual inquiries about our insurance coverage, our savings, our advance directives. When Frank was moved to a regular room and settled for the night, Sarah offered to drive me home. "Mom, we should probably talk about practical things," she said, as we sat in her car outside my building. "If something happens to Dad, are you prepared? Do you have everything in order?" "What kind of things, Sarah?" "Well, like his will, his accounts, power of attorney documents, administrative stuff. Why would I need to worry about that? Frank's going to be fine." "Of course he is. I just meant in general. You and Dad are getting older, and it's smart to have plans in place. I could help you organize everything, make sure nothing gets overlooked." And there it was. The hook I'd been waiting for. Frank's heart attack wasn't an opportunity for family reconciliation. It was an opportunity for Sarah to position herself for access to our assets when we eventually died. "Sarah, our affairs are already in order." "Oh, good. That's so smart of you. If you ever need help updating anything, or if the paperwork gets overwhelming, I'd be happy to help. It's what daughters do. Actually, what daughters do is respect their parents' autonomy and privacy. But thanks for the offer." I got out of her car without another word. She sat there for a moment, probably trying to figure out why her manipulation hadn't worked, then drove away into the night. I never heard from her again unless I initiated contact. Frank recovered fully, though the heart attack served as a wake-up call for both of us. He finally began to understand the stress I'd been carrying, managing our finances while protecting them from our children's exploitation. He started taking an active interest in our money, our planning, our future security. "I'm sorry I left you to deal with all of this alone," he said one evening as we reviewed our account statements together. "I should have seen what they were doing. I should have supported you when you tried to put a stop to it." "Frank, you weren't ready to see it. None of us were ready to face what our family had become. Are we better now? As a family?" I considered that question for a long time. David was slowly earning back some trust, proving through consistent actions that he might be capable of change. Sarah had effectively removed herself from our lives, which was painful, but probably necessary. Frank was finally engaged as my partner rather than a passive observer. "We're smaller now," I said finally. "But maybe we're more honest. Maybe we're healthier." 2 years after I first discovered their theft, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable in my old life. I booked a 2-week cruise to Alaska, something I'd always wanted to do but never felt I could afford because there was always someone else's emergency to fund. Carmen agreed to check on Frank while I was gone, and David offered to drive me to the airport. As we sat in traffic on the way to JFK, he asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Ma, are you happy?" I thought about it. Was I happy? I was lonely sometimes, especially when I thought about Sarah and the relationship we'd never have. I was sad that it had taken me 74 years to learn how to say no to people I loved. I was angry that I'd wasted so much time and money on people who saw me as nothing more than a resource. But I was also free from the constant anxiety of managing other people's crises, free from the exhausting cycle of giving and giving until I had nothing left, free to spend my money on myself, my time on my interests, my energy on my own well-being. "I'm learning to be happy," I told David. "For the first time in my adult life, I'm living for myself instead of through other people. It's scary sometimes, but it's also liberating. I'm proud of you, Ma. I know that probably doesn't mean much coming from me, but I am. It means everything, David. Because you're not just saying words. You're showing me through your actions that you understand why I had to make these changes." Alaska was everything I'd dreamed it would be. Glaciers that took my breath away, whales breaching alongside our ship, northern lights dancing across the sky like magic. I made friends with other solo travelers, shared meals with people who chose my company not because they needed something from me, but because they enjoyed my conversation. For 2 weeks, I was just Margaret. Not somebody's mother, not somebody's ATM, not somebody's caregiver or enabler or victim. Just a woman exploring the world, experiencing beauty, making choices based on what brought me joy rather than what kept other people temporarily satisfied. When I returned to New York, I felt like a different person. Or maybe I felt like the person I'd always been underneath all the roles other people had imposed on me. Frank noticed the change immediately. "You look different," he said, studying my face as I unpacked my souvenirs. "I feel different." "Frank, I think I understand something now that I never understood before." "What's that?" "I thought love meant sacrifice. I thought being a good mother meant giving my children everything they wanted, even when it hurt me. I thought family meant accepting behavior I'd never tolerate from strangers, just because we shared DNA. And now? Now I think love means boundaries. I think being a good mother means teaching my children to be responsible adults, even if they resent me for it. I think family means treating each other with respect, or it's not really family at all." Frank nodded slowly. "I think you might be right." That conversation marked a new chapter in our marriage, too. Frank became an active partner in protecting our financial security and emotional well-being. When David occasionally tested boundaries or asked for small favors, Frank was there to support my decisions instead of undermining them. When Sarah made her rare attempts to manipulate her way back into our good graces, Frank recognized the tactics immediately and refused to be swayed by them. We restructured our wills, removing Sarah as a beneficiary and limiting David's inheritance to a trust that would provide for his basic needs but couldn't be accessed all at once. We set up long-term care insurance and advanced directives that protected us from being financially exploited in our final years. We took control of our own aging process instead of leaving ourselves vulnerable to adult children who'd proven they couldn't be trusted with our well-being. And slowly, gradually, I began to build a life that belonged to me instead of being defined by my usefulness to other people. I took art classes at the community center, discovering a talent for watercolor painting I'd never had time to develop. I joined a book club full of women my age who were also learning to live for themselves after decades of service to their families. I volunteered at a literacy program, teaching English to new immigrants who appreciated my time and efforts without expecting me to solve all their problems. Carmen and I became genuine friends, not just neighbors thrown together by circumstance. We took weekend trips to museums and gardens, sharing conversations that ranged from profound to silly. She introduced me to her extended family, who welcomed me with warmth that expected nothing in return. For the first time in years, I was part of a community that valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. On my 75th birthday, I threw myself a party. Not a family obligation where I provided the food and cleaned up afterward while pretending to be grateful for the attention, but a real celebration with people who genuinely wanted to celebrate me. David came, bringing flowers and a homemade card with a heartfelt apology for all the birthdays he'd ruined with his selfishness. Frank grilled hamburgers and actually seemed to enjoy playing host for my friends. Carmen brought her famous pastels and told embarrassing stories about my failed attempts to learn salsa dancing. My book club friends shared readings from my favorite poets. My art teacher displayed some of my paintings, making me feel like a real artist for the first time in my life. Sarah didn't come. She didn't call or text or acknowledge the day in any way. 2 years earlier, her absence would have ruined the entire celebration for me. Now, it barely registered. I was too busy enjoying the people who'd chosen to be there, too occupied with genuine happiness to waste energy on someone who'd chosen to make herself irrelevant to my life. As I blew out the candles on my cake, surrounded by people who'd learned to love the real me rather than the convenient me, I made a wish that had nothing to do with anyone else. I wished for continued strength to maintain my boundaries. I wished for the wisdom to keep choosing self-respect over self-sacrifice. I wished for many more years of living as myself instead of as other people's solutions. Looking back now, I can see that the day I caught David stealing from me was the beginning of my real life, not the end of my family relationships. It was the day I stopped being a victim and started being a woman who demanded respect. It was the day I learned that saying no was not selfish. It was survival. The money they stole was significant, but it wasn't the real theft. The real theft was of my dignity, my autonomy, my right to be treated as a person with value beyond my bank balance. Getting that money back would have been nice, but getting myself back was priceless. I sleep better now. I make decisions based on what's best for me and Frank, not what will keep our adult children temporarily satisfied. I spend money on things that bring me joy instead of constantly calculating how much I need to keep in reserve for their next crisis. I say yes when I want to say yes and no when I mean no, without justifying my choices to anyone. My relationship with David continues to slowly improve. He calls regularly now, not because he wants something, but because we've developed an actual friendship based on mutual respect. He pays his own bills, handles his own emergencies, and treats me like a person whose thoughts and feelings matter. It's taken years, but we've built something real out of the wreckage of our old dysfunctional dynamic. Sarah remains a stranger who shares my genetic material. Sometimes I feel guilty about that, like I should try harder to repair our relationship. But then I remember that relationships require mutual effort, and she's made it clear that she's only interested in a relationship where I give and she takes. That's not a relationship. It's exploitation. I'm too old and too wise to pretend otherwise. Frank and I are planning another trip, this time to Ireland, where his grandparents were born. We have the time and money for these adventures because we're no longer funding other people's lifestyles. We have the energy for new experiences because we're no longer constantly stressed about being emotionally and financially manipulated. We have the peace of mind to enjoy our golden years because we finally learned to put our own well-being first. Sometimes people ask me if I miss them, if I regret the choices I made that resulted in losing a daughter and nearly losing a son. The honest answer is complicated. I miss the people I thought they were, the loving, grateful children I'd imagined I was raising. I miss the family I thought we were, close-knit, supportive, genuinely caring about each other's well-being. But I don't miss the reality of what we actually were. I don't miss the constant anxiety about their next crisis. I don't miss the financial stress of funding their irresponsible choices. I don't miss the emotional exhaustion of loving people who saw my love as weakness to be exploited. I don't miss being treated like an ATM with convenient emotional attachments. What I've gained is so much more valuable than what I lost. I've gained self-respect. I've gained financial security. I've gained authentic relationships with people who appreciate me for who I am, rather than what I can do for them. I've gained the freedom to live my own life, instead of constantly managing other people's chaos. Most importantly, I've gained the knowledge that it's never too late to change. At 73, I learned to set boundaries. At 74, I learned to prioritize my own well-being. At 75, I'm still learning new things about myself, still discovering interests and talents I'd never had time to explore when I was too busy serving everyone else. The woman who used to jump every time her phone rang with another crisis, who used to give away her security to buy temporary peace, who used to accept crumbs of affection in exchange for constant financial support. That woman was killing herself slowly with kindness that wasn't really kind at all. Real kindness starts with being kind to yourself. Real love includes loving yourself enough to demand respect. Real family relationships are built on mutual care and consideration, not one-sided exploitation dressed up as need. I wish I'd learned these lessons earlier. I wish I'd recognized the signs of financial abuse before it had cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars. I wish I'd understood the difference between helping someone and enabling them before I'd spent decades creating entitled adults who saw me as their personal bank. But I'm grateful I learned them at all. I'm grateful every day that I found the strength to say no, to set boundaries, to choose self-preservation over self-sacrifice. I'm grateful for every morning I wake up knowing that my day belongs to me, not to someone else's emergency. I'm grateful for every dollar in my bank account that's there, because I chose to keep it rather than give it away to people who didn't appreciate it. If you're listening to this and recognizing yourself in my story, if you're the parent who gives and gives until you have nothing left, if you're the grandparent whose pension is funding your adult children's lifestyle choices, if you're the spouse who's afraid to rock the boat even when you're drowning, please know that it's not too late to choose differently. You don't owe anyone access to your bank account just because you share their DNA. You don't owe anyone the right to treat you poorly just because you love them. You don't owe anyone your financial security, your peace of mind, or your self-respect. What you owe yourself is protection. What you owe yourself is respect. What you owe yourself is the chance to live your own life instead of constantly managing other people's poor choices. Setting boundaries isn't mean, it's necessary. Saying no isn't selfish, it's self-preservation. Cutting off financial support isn't punishment, it's natural consequences. Demanding respect isn't asking too much, it's asking for the bare minimum that every human being deserves. The people who truly love you will respect your boundaries, even if they don't like them initially. The people who can't respect your boundaries are showing you that they love what you can do for them more than they love who you are. That information is painful, but valuable. Use it to make decisions that protect your well-being instead of enabling their exploitation. Your value as a person isn't measured by how much you're willing to give away. Your worth as a parent isn't determined by how much you're willing to sacrifice. Your success as a family member isn't based on how much abuse you're willing to accept in the name of keeping peace. You are valuable because you exist. You deserve respect because you're human. You have the right to financial security, emotional peace, and authentic relationships that add to your life instead of constantly draining from it. It took me 73 years to learn these truths. Don't wait as long as I did. Start today. Start with one small boundary. Start with one gentle no. Start with one decision to put your well-being first. Your future self will thank you for it. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation where love became a transaction and family felt more like a burden than a blessing? Have you ever had to choose between being used and being alone? Let me know in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our stories is the first step toward changing them. And if this message resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. These conversations matter. These stories need to be told. And sometimes, knowing we're not alone in our struggles is exactly what we need to find the strength to change our lives. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for allowing me to open my heart. And thank you for considering the possibility that you, too, deserve better than settling for love that comes with strings attached. Remember, it's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to demand respect. And it's never too late to start living the life you actually want instead of the life others expect you to provide for them.